Okay, guys. Well, I'm starting 1 minute or so early just to give you guys a chance to let me know whether you can see me okay and whether you can hear me okay. So if you would be able to do that, that'd be great. Okay, let's do a quick audio check here. Can anybody please let me know if you can hear me okay? And we'll get the technical stuff out of the way. Okay, cool. So, all right. Well, welcome everybody. I'll give it 1 more minute or so for some people to come in. And as you can see, people are coming in quite fast. We're at 11 and we're not even 1 minute in, so pretty cool. So yeah, just to give you guys an idea what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about hardware. It's a topic that I get a lot of questions about from people that start off in the industry. They want to know, what to buy, what to use, what's the best choice, and so forth. Now, before we dive in, I just want to let you guys know, for those that don't know, I want to say a big thank you to BENQ. I don't know if you guys know, but BENQ is one of my most loyal channel sponsors. They've been sponsoring me for years. They're a monitor manufacturing company, and I'm also one of their ambassadors, right? So I do a lot of promotion work for them. I obviously use their products, as you probably know if you know my channel. So that said, a big shout out to BENQ. And yeah, they sent me this very cool shirt right here. So yeah, wearing it proudly, right? Okay, that doesn't mean we're going to be talking about BENQ products. We're going to be talking about all hardware products, okay? So what I would like to do is kind of make this a kind of an open discussion. And I want to go with, let's say, desktop versus laptop, let's say Apple versus Windows. And we're not going to go into crazy detail as to every specific type of graphic card and whatnot. But what I want to ask you guys is, what are your questions? What are you struggling with, right? What do you use? Why do you use it? Do you have any issues, and so forth and so on, right? So as I take a sip of coffee here, you will have the opportunity to put some questions in, right? I see you've got some familiar names there. Hey, Yana. Cool. Okay, everybody. So any hardware concerns? And while you guys think about that, let me just put something out there. I recently did a video on my 2020 where I used an RTX 6000 card, right? For the simple reason that now with my 2020, you can render using a GPU. And I don't know if that's something you guys do or not, whether you have thought about it and so forth, right? So let me see what kind of question you guys are putting up there. Okay, let's see. Is a 4K RGB 99% necessary for great textures? Good question from Hero. Well, the thing is this, it kind of depends on what kind of work you're doing. When we talk about color and color depth, I would say for the most part, it's very important to consider whether you're using an 8-bit or a 10-bit monitor, right? Now, I did a whole video on that, what exactly the difference is, but I'll try to explain it to you guys for those who haven't seen it or don't know. Basically, every monitor has RGB channels, right? So you got a red, green, and blue. So that's 3 channels, right? And if you look at a individual color, let's say, for example, from a black to a white, that's 1 step, right? So that'd be 0 and 1. Now, the more steps between totally black and totally white, right, the more color depth you get. Now, to give it in a simple way, an 8-bit monitor has about 1 million color depth steps. A 10-bit monitor has 1 billion, right? So it's a whole different ballgame. Now, the 4K aspect is very cool for you when you're working with it, right? Because you have the opportunity to, kind of pixel peep, if you know what I mean, to check that out. For textures per se, your textures will look better if you have a higher resolution in your textures and if your topology is right, okay? So let me know if that answers your question. Okay, I get a question here saying, is 8 GB RAM enough for Maya? Well, first of all, 8 GB is, I would say, the bare minimum. Now, keep in mind that it also depends on what version of Maya you're working with. I mean, if you're working with, let's say, Maya 2015, 8 GB may be fine. But once you get to, let's say, Maya 2020, it's a whole different story. Now, if you want to figure out what you need, you can go to Autodesk.com and you can Google system requirements for the individual Maya package you're working with, right? Okay, so you're using 2018 version. Right, so what you do is you go to Google, you type in system requirements Maya 2018. They'll bring you to the Autodesk site and it will show you a list of what you need. I would say at a very minimum, 8 GB of RAM, okay? Okay, let's see. What if you're using a gaming GPU instead of a Quadro? Well, I had a GTX 1080 card for a very long time. That works perfectly fine. I would say one is more related to speed and the other is more related to power. It very much depends on what type of activity you're doing. For example, are you doing animation rendering? Are you doing that in-house? And if so, you have very different requirements for your hardware compared to other activities, right? Let's see, no lag problem in Maya. Okay, so that's fine. I guess if you got 8 GB of RAM, but for example, you have a solid state drive compared to a traditional hard disk drive, that would be a big help. And of course, the CPU is a very, very, very important. Now, besides rendering, and GPU rendering is fairly new in Maya, keep in mind that the heavy lifting, even today, is still done by the CPU, so your processor, right? So if you have a multi-core Intel CPU, then that will do a lot of the hard work. And if that's then supported by 8 gigs of RAM, you should be okay, right? Now, on the other hand, if you have 64 gigabytes of RAM and you have a very slow CPU, then you're still in trouble because it won't be able to hack it, right? Okay, AMD Radeon, good question. Well, at some point, all graphic cards you should be using was all NVIDIA and all CPUs was all Intel, right? Now, those days are gone. I mean, NVIDIA is awesome. I use NVIDIA, but it's also very expensive, right? Now, I had a AMD Radeon card that I tested. It was also a very expensive card, performed quite well. But the thing is, with Maya right now, NVIDIA has partnered up with Maya, with Autodesk to be exact, and they developed the whole GPU rendering process together, right? So for me personally, I'm sticking with NVIDIA. Okay. Right, so this is not really a hardware question, but do I use Substance Painter instead of Keyshot? Yes, of course. It's just that in tutorials, I typically want to use Keyshot just to show you the process of getting some texture on it, right? And I don't want to make it a too lengthy video, right? Okay, let's see, what else? Lagging problems. Okay, so here's a question about the Radeon 520. Well, that's a good graphics card. Now, the thing is this, I don't know every individual graphic card that's out there. You would have to do some research, look at some benchmark testing and so forth to compare cards. There are a whole bunch of sites out there that will let you do exactly that, right? You just type in the model and it will show how it compares to others and so forth. But what's more important to you, I would say, is to consider what is your typical workflow? What do you do most? Do you do a lot of animation caching, for example? Do you do in-house rendering? And if you do rendering, what type of rendering are you doing? Is it a lot of caustics like glass and mirrors and reflection and refraction and that kind of stuff? Once you get into the area of that, where you have to do some really, really hard crunching, then it's kind of the consideration, should you do that in-house and then spend a lot of money on a great graphics card, a lot of RAM, very fast hard disk, or should you consider outsourcing the rendering altogether to, for example, a render firm, right? Okay, so good question. Does the new Maya Arnold GPU render support multi-GPU setups? It does. If you have SLI bridges between your cards, and for those of you who don't know what that is, if you have compatible NVIDIA cards, you can bridge them together so it will team up and work as one, right? So if you have multiple GPUs in your system, like for example, let's say you got 3 or 4 GPU, what are they called? RTX 1080s? No, GTX 1080s, right? And they're bridged together with an SLI. They will act basically as one card. So to answer your question, yes, you can do that. Let's see. Looking for an upgrade for the 1080 Ti as an architect. Well, the thing is this: I recently started to use an RTX 6000. Now, keep in mind that's a very, very expensive card, right? We're talking about in the range of $4,000 to $5,000 for the card. But that said, it turned my system into an absolute beast, right? Now, I can't speak for what your budget is. You're saying you're an architect, you're working as an architect. If you are working real time, it can speed up your workflow enormously, especially if you are looking at real time renders, depending on the render you're using. You get less lag in your system. Your render time is reduced, in the example I did on my video with my 2020, my render with the GPX 6000 was 24 times faster, right? I think a 2-week render or something was brought down to literally minutes. So it's up to you to decide whether you want to do that investment or not. But I would definitely check out the RTX range. That's not a game card. That is a professional industry card. So please let me know in the comments if you think that's helpful for you, right? Let's see. Never tried Arnold rendering because it takes a lot of time to render. I would say basically everything takes a lot of time to render. Yeah, Mental Ray was cool. I wouldn't say better, but it was cool. What I liked about Mental Ray is the ease of use when creating materials, because you had a lot of presets, right? You could choose, rubber, glass, chrome, and all that. Arnold is more working from a base material and building on that. And purely from a rendering standpoint, that basically renders faster, right? The problem is that you have to know a lot more before you're able to master it. Okay, let's see. When using a multi-GPU setup, can you mix different GPUs like GPU 1080 RTX 27 Super? Okay, well, that's a very good question. And actually, I had that exact issue because I had a GTX 1080 Ti and I had an RTX 6000. And I wanted to bridge them together, right? Now, normally the process is if you want to do an SLI bridge, you preferably use identical cards. Now, I wouldn't say you couldn't link up a GTX 1070 with a GTX 1080. That would probably work, but you don't want to mix GTX cards with RTX cards, because that's mixing game cards with industrial cards, right? Okay, let's see. A budget between 2,500 and 3,500 euros because spent too much on the CPU. And okay, so Taylor, that means you have that amount left besides the CPU and the 64 gigs. And again, there's this notion that you should get the most expensive kit possible, right? Now, I very much disagree with that. It's very, very much about what is your workflow. Now, like I said in the beginning of this live stream, I'm a BENQ ambassador. I'm not talking about BENQ products because I'm an ambassador. I was talking about BENQ products, and then I became an ambassador. Now, the reason why I started using BENQ products way, way, way back, and I'm talking years ago, is basically it's the best bang for my buck, right? I don't want to spend a fortune on hardware. I want the hardware to be good. And I do photography as well, for those of you who don't know. So I got gear for photography, monitors specifically, and for 3D. Now, the same thing applies to hard disks, to graphics cards, memory, and so forth. It's the combination of the individual elements that makes up your output, right? So crazy fast hard disk, slow CPU doesn't work. Very fast CPU, very slow hard disk doesn't work, and so forth and so on. So it has to be in balance. Now you can have a good, solid, fast system set up, I would say, for under $2,000, right? Depending on what you want to do. If you want to do a full feature film rendering on your personal PC, forget it. It's not going to happen, right? Let's see, what else we got? Okay, so any of you guys or girls run into any hardware issues, compatibility issues, hardware that didn't work with your software or wasn't fast enough or anything like that? Let me know. Okay, guys, come on, questions. Okay, so I see some questions going on there that are not about hardware specifically, so I just want to pass on that for now. But okay, so here's a great question from Amat. He's saying, hey, I want to buy a PC desktop. Give me advice. Still a student, okay? Now, the thing is this. Have you ever considered why you would go with a laptop or why you would go with a desktop, right? Now, back in the day, there was a very good reason, because if you had a desktop, it was easier to expand. If you wanted additional hard drives, if you wanted more memory, all that kind of stuff. All the components for a laptop would be way more expensive, right? But the thing is, you can take a laptop with you. Now, if you work remote because you go to clients or whatnot, or go to school and have to show whatever you're doing, it's perfect to have a laptop. Now, the price of laptops went down a lot. The hardware, it's much better in laptops now. And if you, for example, go out and buy a $2,000 laptop, you have a serious piece of equipment that will do a lot for you, right? So I would say, Amat, to answer your question, if you want to buy a desktop, first consider whether it should be a desktop or a laptop. And then second, because of the price points, I would go with the desktop personally, if you don't necessarily have to travel with it. The reason why is I would even consider buying a used system. Now, let me explain that, because used typically means old, right? Now, when people upgrade their system, for example, gamers, right? If they go out and buy a new system, they will sell their old one. Now, usually the motherboard is fine. The power supply is fine, right? The fan is fine. The cooling system is fine. So all of these things you can get very, very cheap. So what you need is to get a good CPU. You need good RAM memory, right? And you probably need a solid state hard drive anyway, because it's much, much faster. Now, that means if you can find a system that has a PCI Express slot for an SSD drive, you could probably get a casing with a motherboard and a power supply and all that for maybe a couple of $100, right? Very, very cheap. Now, you won't have this brand new shiny thing sitting in your room, but it's all about what's inside, right? And that will save you money to go out and get, the elements that really matter. Let's see. Yana is asking a question. Estimate about the issue. How much amount of particles requires RAM? Okay, so when you are working with particles, right, the amount of RAM there's not a direct correlation. It's not just about the particles. It's what about the particles are doing, right? And RAM is more like a buffer. So for particles, it's important to have a solid CPU that does all the calculations, because particles are basically taking up a 3D space location somewhere, and then they move and move and move and move and move. So every position has to be recalculated constantly. That calculation is done by the CPU, and it's supported by the RAM, not vice versa. So the RAM won't do that for you, the CPU will. That said, if you don't have enough RAM, you're done. So it's kind of like the CPU is the boss and then the RAM is supporting. Okay, what do I think of the new AMD Threadripper? I think that's a pretty decent CPU. Okay, Jan is saying bought a new 8-core Ryzen CPU, 32 gigs of RAM. GFX card sucks with 2 gigs of RAM, but I'm considering 8 gigs. Okay, well, let me say this though. Jan, it kind of depends on what you're going to be doing with it, because a lot of people will invest in seriously expensive graphics cards, while in reality, they're doing all the rendering with their CPU because they're working with a CPU-based renderer, right? So why spend thousands on a very expensive graphics card if a much cheaper one will do the job, right? So you need to think about your workflow and investigate whether that will really improve your system. I mean, I would spend that money on a CPU, right, and on additional RAM way before I would choose to upgrade my graphics card. Now, that said, if that's the case, then why do I have this expensive graphics card? Well, excuse me. I have that because I do my rendering on the GPU, not the CPU. Okay, so your main render right now is Arnold. Well, Arnold in Maya 2020. Are you basically saying that you are rendering in, because in Maya 2020, you can use both. You can still render with the CPU, right? You can choose which one you want. And that same thing applies to 3ds Max. So you can choose to use the CPU for rendering. You can also choose to use the GPU for rendering, okay? So which one is your primary? And with your 2 gigs of RAM on your current card, that shouldn't be much faster than your CPU. In fact, I would think that your 8-core CPU would be faster than your GPU. Okay, let's see. Can I do some tutorials on ZBrush texturing? Yeah, I started a series. I got a couple of videos in backlog, but yeah, I'll continue to do that. Okay, anything, let me ask you guys, maybe a weird question. Does any of you use a space mouse? I once did a video on this, a 3D connection on space mouse, and I thought it was a lot of fun, but it had compatibility issues with other software, so I had to give that up. But just curious if you guys use that, right? Okay, what's a space mouse? Well, first of all, let me just share a link with you guys, right? 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 To control the speed of rotation. So because I'm fairly new. Yeah, that was funny, right? Okay, so this is a full review. I did this a couple of years ago. It's basically kind of a joystick, if you know what a joystick is, right? I want to get one for Christmas. Okay, so if you are specifically working in one platform, let's say 3ds Max or Maya, it can speed up your workflow a lot, but they're typically used by people that work in AutoCAD, right? So designers. It allows you to do crazy awesome things, right? Problem is though, like I said, I jump from Maya to ZBrush to Substance Painter to Keyshot to whatever, and if I can use it in one piece of software and not in the other, that's kind of annoying. So I just decided to, quit that altogether. But if you are specifically working in a platform that you enjoy most, you can consider it. And then you have very small space mouses. They're like a hockey puck, like this big. And they have the big ones with all the buttons and all that. So I put the link in there if you want to check out that video. I'm not sponsored by these guys anyway, but just so you can check that out. Okay. Yeah, both are Autodesk. Yes, 3ds Max and Maya. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's see. Working with the Logitech MX2 and keyboard for now. I actually think I got the exact same one, but I'm not sure. Let me check. No, actually, I got a different one. Yeah, cool. Let's see. Okay, so any questions about pen displays? Right. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Wacom tablets, Huon tablets, Parblo tablets. Do you guys use any of that stuff? Let me just get a quick sip of coffee. Okay, while you think about more hardware stuff, I'll quickly answer the question. Best cloth simulation, Maya, for sure. Let's see. Okay, so I'm seeing some Huon pen tablets. I recently started to use a 22-inch Huon, and I'm very pleased about that. Reason being that it's a fraction of the cost for a Wacom, right? I think the Wacom was something like, I don't know, 2,400 euros or something like that. This thing is like 800, right? And I had others in the past. I used a Parblo, for example, which was okay, not great, but okay, which was a lot cheaper, like $300-400. This one is about, I think, 800, but this in any way, shape, or form, in my personal opinion, you can compare this completely with a Wacom tablet, right? And I talked to Wacom a lot of times about, workflow and all that. And I think they're just so big right now that I'm not going to say they don't care, but it's kind of hard to get their involvement. I asked feedback from them many times. Huon, on the other hand, when I talk to them and I relate issues back to them from users, they're always very responsive. So, oh, thanks, Zafir. Okay, let's see. Okay, some more pen displays. Yeah, cool. So, does anybody here use ZBrush with a mouse? Just curious. Okay, so some people are saying yes, they do. Well, I think working in ZBrush with the mouse is kind of like painting a picture with your nose, right? It's very, very hard. Is it possible? I would say it's possible to tweak models. So if you do your base model in Maya, bring it into ZBrush, and then add some dents and whatnot with your mouse, that would work. If you want to do full-blown sculptures in ZBrush, I think that would be a huge challenge to do that with a mouse. I definitely improved my workflow when I started to work with a pen display, right? Okay, I'm seeing some questions about my computer specs, right? So I got an Intel i7 12 core. I got 64 gigs of RAM. I got an RTX 6000 video card. I have a 4 terabyte solid state drive, and yeah, that's about it. Then I have I got a PD 3220U monitor, which is a 4K 10-bit. I got a PD 3200U monitor, which is a 4K 10-bit. Then I have the Huon 22-inch, which is an 8-bit pen tablet. And then I got a Logitech keyboard, Logitech mouse, both wireless. And yeah, that's basically it. So RAM, it's 64 gigs of RAM, and it's DDR6, I think. Not sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm very happy with my system. And trust me, it took a very, very long time to get a system with those specs because, as you all know, it can be very expensive. The thing is, though, if you are working freelance, then you need good gear, right? I mean, if I am struggling to make the most easy tasks possible because lack of proper hardware, then I'm going to be in trouble fast. And that's why I got big screens. I got two 32-inch screens, right? The reason why I have that is because I do both 3D work and photography work, right? And when I'm dealing with a client, either for photography or for 3D, and they want me to do something specific where it's involving their logo or something, then I want the color of their logo to be absolutely 100% spot on, right? Now, the thing is, in my personal opinion, for that, you need a 10-bit monitor. Now, that's why I use the brand I do, the BENQs, because you spend about half of what you would spend on any other brand. And if I get the same performance, there you go. Okay, let's see. So Kaiser saying, I want AVIX tutorials. Can you provide for buying? Not sure what you mean. I don't sell tutorials. My tutorials are free and they always will be. Okay, is RAM more important to Maya than CPU? Great question. Well, I don't know if you guys know this or not. So let me explain. So the CPU, or central processing unit, right? That's basically the brain of your computer. It's on your motherboard, and what it does is it calculates, right? It calculates everything that's going on, right? The zeros and ones, the binary, if you will, right? And then based on the calculations, instructions are sent out to other components and so forth, right? Now, the RAM is basically extra brain memory, if you will. RAM itself is dead. RAM is purely a buffer to have additional memory. So if you are looking to, for example, speed up your workflow, then there are a couple of ways to do that. If you're working CPU based, so let's forget about GPU rendering for now, right? If you're working CPU based, then you either want to have, obviously, a faster CPU. So instead of an i3, an i5, or an i7, right? That's one option. Second option is you want to have more cores. So 6 core, 8 core, 12 core, and so forth on the CPU. And then if you got all of that to the max, then what you would do is you would start to add additional support with more RAM, but specifically fast RAM, because RAM has to be read. And a fast hard drive, right? So a solid state drive, or an SSD drive, is way faster, and they're very affordable now. And the cool thing is they don't have any moving parts, so they can't break. Traditional hard disks, at some point, because they got rotating parts inside, they will just shut down and go corrupt. A solid state drive, no moving parts, nothing will break there, right? Okay, so let's see. So how long does an SSD last? Well, like I said, basically an SSD is similar to a very tiny motherboard, right? You just click it into a slot in your motherboard onto a PCI Express card there. There's nothing to break, right? Unless you step on it or something. So in theory, it will last forever, right? And it's so much faster. It's so much faster. I switched from a traditional hard disk drive to a solid state drive, and I had the MV2, I think it's called, the Samsung one. I used to start up my system, and fair enough, it's a big system, but it would take like a minute, maybe a minute and a half or so before everything was up and running. Now it's crazy. It's like literally seconds, right? I click on it and it's bam, because a traditional hard disk drive has disks inside that rotate, and it has an arm that's reading these disks like back in the day, you had these record players, right? So it kind of, quote unquote, takes forever. Okay, so I had a question about a link to the monitors, right? So let me get that for you. Hang on. Be right back, guys. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so here's a link to my website, and it's basically a list of the hardware I use. Well, not all of it, most of it. Definitely the monitors, and yeah, you can check it out there. Okay. Okay, so what's the difference between GPU and CPU rendering? Well, CPU is the central processing unit, right? Which is the brain of your motherboard, which I basically just explained. GPU is your video card, your graphics card. Now, GPU rendering becomes interesting when you talk about real-time rendering. So, for example, in gaming, that's what gaming is. Gaming is real-time rendering, right? So, what's the difference? Well, it's just different. I mean, the thing is, if you decide to, I really don't know how to explain this. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, why is one card different than the other? It's a different technology. It's a different method. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. It's just different. And it's way faster. Trust me. I did a product rendering in Keyshot 9, and they now also have the option to use GPU. And that's cool because everybody is now starting to move towards GPU-based rendering, just to keep that in mind, right? And my render time went from 20 minutes to 14 seconds, which is kind of cool, right? Okay, good question. Difference between laptop performance and desktop performance with similar specs. So why is it preferable to work on desktops? Well, I kind of mentioned that earlier on a little bit, but basically the thing is this. If you don't absolutely have to be mobile, then don't work on a laptop, right? Because a laptop is much smaller, which means that the components are smaller, which means that it costs more to make these components smaller, right? You always have heating issues because it doesn't have enough ventilation compared to a desktop system. A desktop system is easier to upgrade, right? You can pull out a hard disk drive and put in a new one, or put in 2 or 3 or 4, which is kind of a problem with laptops. And yeah, and it's overall usually cheaper, right? Now, that said, laptops are becoming more affordable. They do have better components, smaller components. So I would say if you can get away with buying a desktop, do it. It's way more efficient. I don't know if that answers your question. Let me know, but that's my take on it. Yeah, so Adam is basically saying what I was saying to some extent. Yeah, good point. Does it have a huge difference in the graphics quality? I assume you're talking about CPU rendering versus GPU rendering. The quality, that kind of depends a little bit on, of course, what you're using to do the actual render, right? So you got graphics cards and graphics card. You got a $300 graphics card and you got a $6,000 graphic card. And it depends on your settings. The problem is on a $300 graphics card, you would stay away from certain settings because your system simply can't handle it. And as a result, you would have lesser quality. Now, if you were able to choose the exact same quality, regardless whether one would take way longer than the other, then technically there shouldn't be a difference, right? Let's see. I want a laptop. It has to be a laptop because I'm traveling. I'm a beginner under 1200. Okay, so Tushar, you want to get a laptop under 1200. What I personally would advise, kind of depending on where you live and so forth, is consider buying used. And I'll tell you why. If you buy used hardware, and I'm not talking 5 years old, I'm talking like 3-4 months old, right? Or maybe 2 months old. Typically, hardware is sold for 50% of the new price, depending on where you live, right? So instead of going to the store, spending $1,200 on a $1,200 laptop, you can spend $1,200 on a $2,400 laptop, for $1,200. But be careful though, because of warranty and all that. So if you can buy it from a store used with warranty, I would consider that, because you then have money left to put into things that will bring you a lot more quality. Okay, cool question. Michael is saying, what's the difference between NVIDIA and AMD? Well, it's AMD, not AND, okay? Now, I am not exactly sure what the acronym AMD means. I think it's something like American Micro, whatever. But anyway, NVIDIA is a company name, right? And AMD is a company name. So they're two different companies. They both make graphics cards, right? And they make more than just graphics cards, but they make graphics cards. And it's like comparing, I don't know, Dodge to Ford or whatever. They both make cars. In this case, they both make graphics cards. Now, that's not the important fact. The important fact for me, what graphics card to use, despite the fact that they have a certain performance, is in what developments are they involved. That brings me to the point of what I said earlier. For example, NVIDIA has a collaboration together with Autodesk to develop GPU-based rendering in Maya 2020, in 3ds Max 2020, and so forth. So it's optimized towards NVIDIA, right? That's why because I use a lot of Maya, I would choose NVIDIA, right? Now, so that's something to keep in mind. If you look at hardware in general, and I used to have my own small computer business, right? The thing is, if you go out and buy a cheap system or a very expensive system, the overall components that are on board, so the cables, the clips, the PCI slots and whatever, all of this stuff is probably manufactured by maybe 3 or 4 companies worldwide, right? And so they're exactly the same. The problem is, if you go to a high-end store and you buy your PC there, you pay way more money. So if you know anything about computers, what you would try to do is anything that's generic and doesn't have a huge effect on performance, buy as cheap as possible. Anything that does have an effect, buy it individually and build your own system, right? Okay, so CUDA versus Quadro versus GeForce. Well, CUDA is a methodology, Quadro is an industrial card, and GeForce is a consumer gaming card. Let's see. Oh, and one more point about what I said about the systems and being cheaper and whatnot. So, like a million years ago, I worked at a computer company where they manufactured computers, right? Now, to give you an idea of what the cost difference is, if I would buy a expensive computer desktop system, right, you would have a motherboard and you would have a hard disk drive and you would have a cable between the motherboard and the hard disk drive. And it would be, let's say, I don't know, 3 inches. You would have another one that's 4 inches, you got 7 inches, you got 9 inches, and so forth and so on, right? If you have a specific cable length, specifically for that connection, you got maybe 10 different products in one system, right? The cheaper computer brands, what they do is they take a 10-inch cable and they use it for everything. So they buy it in bulk, right? It's much cheaper, but you got these tied together and folded together and whatnot. It doesn't affect the performance, but it looks sloppy. But I don't spend my day looking inside my computer anyway, so I don't care, right? So what do I think of using a 4K TV instead of a monitor? Well, nowadays, there's not a lot of difference, I would say, between TVs and monitors from a display standpoint, but it's a different functionality. For example, the BENQ screens that I use, they come with it's called a puck, right? It's a round disc, and it has all sorts of settings that you can use to optimize your display. So let's say I'm working on an animation. If you're looking at an animation, you want a certain contrast to clearly see the movements from keyframe to keyframe, right? If you're, let's say, working on FX, you want a whole different color setup. Now, the monitors are specifically set up in a way that you can choose all these settings. You can calibrate the color. It's specifically made towards working as a screen, right? And then again, a TV is a TV. So you get what you get, and you're looking at it. You can play with color and brightness, but that's about it. So I would even turn that around. I would probably watch TV on a monitor instead of using a TV as a monitor. Does that make sense? Okay, let's see. What else? Questions. A whole lot of question marks. What are those for? Okay, did I forget to answer a question or something? Yeah, okay. Okay, so CUDA versus Quadro performance on rendering. Well, again, CUDA is a rendering protocol, right? It's a software protocol how to perform rendering. Quadro is an industrial branded type of graphics card. And I'm not talking about viewport rendering, so I don't really get what you're asking here. Okay, so bigger TV is easier because of eye strain. Well, I use 32-inch monitors. They're plenty big, right? And I don't have an issue with that at all. Let's see. Yeah, so ZBrush 2020 to beginner tutorials, I already said that I'm creating a series, and I have the first 4 videos of that already online. So check that out, right? Okay, let's see. So we talked about CPUs, we talked about GPUs, we talked about hard disks, we talked about monitors, we talked about pen displays, we talked about space mouses. So what other kind of hardware are you using, and why? So I'm getting some software questions here while we're waiting for additional questions. Yeah, so as far as tutorials are concerned, I have a very, very, very long list of requests. Yeah, I basically covered all the hardware. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, let's go back to the hard disk for a sec, right? Hang on. Yeah, I'm talking and reading at the same time. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so when it comes to hard disk drives, if you have the possibility to use a solid state drive like a Samsung one, and I think it's called an M2, right? Then that'd be something to consider for sure. They don't break. They're super fast. They're quite affordable, and they're just awesome, right? Let's see, buying a 3D connection mouse, is that worth it? Well, I had one, I got rid of it, and I explained earlier why. It works great until you switch from one platform to the other. So if I were to work in Maya and then I go to ZBrush, and from ZBrush to Substance Painter, it would work fine in Maya. It wouldn't work in ZBrush. It would work partially in Substance Painter, and it would work again in Maya. So I just couldn't deal with that. I thought it wasn't productive, so that's why I got rid of it. Have I ever used a curved monitor? No, I have not, and I don't have any intention to do so either, right? And this is purely a personal opinion. I think a curved monitor is kind of a gimmick for the simple reason that if you look at the world through your eyes and the way eyes work in general, right? You have a perceived distance towards an object, right? And even though things are set up flat in front of you, your two eyes kind of calculate a stereo image together and put that into your brain, right? So although it seems cool to have a curved screen on your desk, it kind of warps the image, in my personal opinion. And I don't really want that, because I want things to be in a tight perspective when I'm modeling something, so I don't get a weird set up so it looks off, right? Let's see. Okay, so we got another 10 minutes or so. So yeah, let's open this up to some software questions as well. Okay. So if you got any hardware or software questions, then let me know. Okay, so gaming mouse better than using a normal mouse, and high DPI mouses and so forth. Okay. Well, when it comes to using a mouse as a 3D artist, the accuracy is very, very, very important, right? It has to be where it should be and not bounce all over the place or skip or whatnot. Now, you have the traditional mouses. I'm not sure if people still use those, but the one with a ball in it. And then you have the mouse that's optical. So basically with a laser in it, right? Now, I don't know if you guys can see this right here. That's my mouse, right? It's a Logitech. It's a wireless. First of all, wires drive me nuts. I don't want any wires on my desk at all. So I always work wireless. I obviously use an optical mouse and high DPI. I would say if you buy a decent quality mouse, let's say in the price range of maybe, I don't know, 40, 50 bucks or so, every mouse that I ever had in that price range worked just fine, right? Now, this mouse right here, and I put a link to my website as well. If you go to mhtutorials.com, there's a list where it lists all my software and hardware. This thing is it's a Performance MX mouse, right? So that's the one. Like I said, it's on my website. So you check out the website, you go to hardware and software overview, and you got a whole bunch of links, and then you can check it from there. And I think my new hard disk drive is there as well, right? Okay, let's see. So Houdini compared to Maya, what are the big differences? Oh, that's a huge, huge, huge difference. Maya is intended for 3D modeling, for animation, for a little bit of FX, that kind of stuff, right? Now, if you know Maya's Hypershade, which is node-based, and you also have the node editor that I just did a video on like the other day, right? Houdini is completely node-based. So basically, you got a bunch of nodes that you're connecting to each other with lines and whatnot. The learning curve for Houdini is huge. It takes a very long time to get skilled in Houdini. It's, I would say, the industry standard for FX nowadays. But again, it's very, very complicated. And if you want to be an FX artist using Houdini, you need to spend years learning that, right? Let's see. How differently is industry software and Pixar and Disney in-house software? Okay, well, the thing is, a lot of software developed within studios like Pixar, Disney, and so forth. It's developed because they need to do something that they can because the software doesn't exist, right? So, for example, that's how Pixar's Render Man started. They needed, I don't know what movie it was. I think it was Monsters, Inc. They needed to do hair simulation, and they didn't have, or fur, and they didn't have the proper software to do so. So they developed the software in-house. And once they used it for the movie, later on, it became a commercial and viable product. Now, that's how most software develops. They create it, then they start using it, then it becomes a plugin, then it becomes part of the software. Now, looking at Arnold in Maya, same deal. Looking at Mental Ray in Maya, same deal. Mental Ray used to be created by NVIDIA. They stopped doing that, right? So Mental Ray disappeared, and then Arnold came in, and now it's a default part of Maya. That's how that works, right? And if you're worried about not knowing how to use industry software or not knowing how to use, for example, company-specific software, nobody does, right? You only learn once you work there. Interesting question. Can I learn Cinema 4D and work totally on it without ever having to need to learn Maya? I want to become a motion graphics artist. Okay. That's kind of a curious question. Because, first of all, Cinema 4D, just to give you a breakdown, if I look at every person I ever talked to, right, and I ask them, hey, what are you working with, right? I would say 40% works in Maya, 40% works in 3ds Max, so that's 80, right? Then 15% works in Blender, right? And I'm talking about modeling, right? Not about ZBrush and stuff. So 40, 40, 15%, right? So we're at 95. And then you got a couple of others, and then you got Cinema 4D. So I would say 1 in 100 that I ever talked to works in Cinema 4D. So I'd be careful with that. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but if you want to work in the industry, okay. So that's one thing. Second, you're saying a motion graphics artist. Well, I don't know what type of motion graphics you're talking about, but if you're talking about like intros and stuff like that, you wouldn't be using Cinema 4D at all. You'd be using like After Effects or something like that, or Premiere Pro, unless I'm misunderstanding what you mean by motion graphics, right? Okay, Octane versus Houdini. Well, Octane is a renderer. Houdini is a software program. Okay, so why isn't Blender good enough to be the industry standard? I always get this question, and I always love it, right? Okay, so the thing is this. Blender is made here in Holland, right? And Blender is a completely open source free product. So anybody can get it completely for free. You can use it commercially, right? So you can learn it, you can work with it, you can work for clients with it. You don't have to pay them anything. That's great, right? Now, there's a trend where more and more people are starting to use Blender. And the reason why they're doing that is because the other platforms are so expensive. So if you have to pay hundreds of dollars a month to use Maya, what people will do is they'll say, hey, I'll use Blender instead because it's free. Now, the fact that it's free has a consequence, because if you are developing software to stay in line with industry requirements and you have tons and tons and tons of money coming in, right? You have a lot of money to spend on R&D, so research and development, to develop your product, to add more features and so forth and so on. Blender, on the other hand, although they do that, they're much, much slower. It takes more time. So although there's a trend that's slowly moving towards Blender, I don't see in the future anywhere soon where that is going to be leading, right? I think that's going to be a problem for them, and it always will be. But again, my personal opinion, right? Okay, the best render, Arnold, Octane, or Redshift? I would say Octane 1, Redshift 2, Arnold 3. What's the difference between ZBrush and Mudbox? Okay, ZBrush is the industry standard when it comes to digital sculpting. Mudbox is kind of dead because Mudbox is an Autodesk product. I used Mudbox in the past. The problem is more and more sculpting details or features from Mudbox got moved into Maya and to make it a more complete product. So now you got some simple sculpting tools available in Maya, right? So I don't see a lot of people working with Mudbox anymore. The thing is, though, that ZBrush just took off like a rocket, right? ZBrush is absolute king of the hill, captain of industry, top in the industry, right? There's nothing that will touch ZBrush at all. So if you want to work in the industry and do sculpting, I would definitely consider learning ZBrush, right? Okay, NURBS modeling or mesh modeling? Mesh modeling. That doesn't mean you shouldn't NURBS model. I see a lot of people, specifically when they are modeling cars and stuff like that, they will work with NURBS. But again, looking at the people that I know that model in 3D, 99.9% models in polygons, right? And the remainder would, work in NURBS. So Hassan is saying, why is Blender for free? Well, it's free because it is. The people that developed it, they were kind of annoyed by the fact that, software is so expensive. They wanted to do something open source. So yeah, I don't know exactly how they make their money, but it's free. Consider if industrial standard. Google SketchUp, can it be considered for industrial standards? Simple answer, no. What tips do you have for retopologizing human organic sculpts? Well, the retopo process now is becoming automated or can become automated. For example, in Maya, you now have new retopo tools. You have that in ZBrush as well. However, if you want to do it manually, you need to consider if it's going to be animated or not. And if it is, what the align flow will be regarding that animation. So if you're going to have mouth movement, for example, what you want is to have an edge flow around the mouth that will make that animation possible. Also with areas around the armpits where the arms move, the elbows, the wrists, and so forth and so on, right? Okay. Right, guys. Well, we're in 1 full hour, so I want to shut this down. We're going to do one more question. And yeah, then we'll call it a day, right? Okay, so let's see, Keyshot or V-Ray. 2 very different things. V-Ray is an extremely powerful renderer. V-Ray is creates very realistic renderers. Keyshot is more used for either product rendering, so product design, jewelry, products, and so forth, or for people that use ZBrush, funny enough. A lot of people that use ZBrush use Keyshot, apparently. I wouldn't want to compare them, though, because I think they're 2 very, very different things, okay? All right, guys. Well, that's it for me. 1 hour in full. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, as always. Don't forget to check out the forum if you haven't already. I have a group of 3,000 plus 3D artists from all over the world, right? And they are all in that group. And if you hang on, I'll give you a link. So you are hereby invited. Here it is. It's a very respectful group. Everybody is in there, from people that are absolutely new to the industry to former Disney artists. We got Pixar people. We got people that have worked with George Lucas. We got a whole ton of talented people there. So check that out. You are hereby invited, and you don't have to post anything. You can just hang out if you want, but we do encourage you to do so, right? Okay, once again, thank you all so much, and thank you so much for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye.